More recent studies have shown, you ready for this number? Over the age of 60, people who have no back pain, 93% have found to have degenerative disc disease. So I'm going to do a card trick for you. I'm going to open the deck of cards. I'm going to say, pick a card, any card. You pick the card, look at it, put it back in. I close my eyes, mix them up. I say, okay, I'm going to guess it's the ace of spades. You say, yeah, it was the ace of spades. How'd you guess it? I turned the cards over. It was 52 aces of spades.
It's the Health in the Real World podcast. It's time to start the show with Chris Janke as your host. Here to give you everything that you need when it comes to fitness strategies. We keep it simple and easy. It's your roadmap to get healthy. You don't need equipment and you don't need a gym. Just the right strategies to get you fit and trim.
Welcome to Health in the Real World. This is Chris Janke. I'm here with Dr. Mitchell Yass. This is fascinating. So I'm going to leave everything that we already covered, but okay, so what's your approach? So that person, 5 years with the herniated disc, they don't know it. They go to the doctor, they get misdiagnosed. How do we combat that?
So if we want to go back and understand the principles of symptoms, you got to go back to Hippocrates, the man who created the understanding of how medicine was supposed to work. Hippocrates himself created the words diagnosis and symptom. He recognized that, and that there have been, I was so fascinated because I've been doing this for 28 years. And I said, I can't be the first guy who figured out that you got to interpret the symptoms to know what the tissue in distress is that's creating them. So I Googled Hippocrates, and they have been doing that, it was Greek. And so you have all these scholars going back and looking at all his work, and they've done studies really interpreting it. And he made it clear that the essence of how the Hippocratic method was designed is that you did these thorough physical evaluations with a thorough history from the individual, which then allowed you, through the interpretation of your findings, to be able to determine what tissue was in distress creating the symptoms. And so what's funny is that's been like that throughout human history up to this point, until what? The advent of the MRI, which then supplanted the idea of symptoms being a factor. And everybody knows this is true. If you have pain and you go to the doctor, you're there for 3 minutes, just long enough for them to say, where's your pain? Over there? Okay, here's your prescription for your MRI. When you get the results come back, we'll interpret them and we'll establish a treatment. She never once asked, so by the way, so what brings on your pain? Could you point to exactly where your pain is? What makes it come? What makes it go? All these have, it's gone. Right. And so what happened was you had a shift from what I describe as natural law, the understanding of how the body works, regardless of your credential, to an organizational law, which is to say the American Medical Association has accepted that the core principle for establishing the cause of pain or other symptoms is to simply interpret an MRI. That's what happened.
It's interesting because I've been thinking about this for a while, because I have clients who come to me with back pain. A lot of clients who start with me, they want two things. They want to get healthy and fit. They want to lose weight, all that stuff, but they have back pain when they exercise. And they all tell me the line of questioning that I have for them is way more thorough. Just like you just said, they'll say, oh, where's your pain? And then they'll write a script. And, I'm asking things like what you said, like what brings it on? Does it hurt worse or does it feel better when you wake up? Does it feel bad when you sit at a computer? Like, what's bringing it on? We figure out what exercises help and what exercises may be hurting it. So you go through your questionnaire. What is I know it's different for each person, but what's kind of like a general a treatment plan? Like, how do you proceed once you figure out their pains?
So let's take one of your clients who's had back pain, okay? And let's say that their pain is 2 inches off to the side of the spine. So I would ask, let's say it's on both sides, 2 inches off to the spine. So what we found was that, and this is what I want people to understand, pain in itself is not the only symptom. There are corroborating symptoms. So let's say this person who's having pain on both sides, 2 inches off the spine on either side, you look at their posture and you notice that they have this severe excessive arching in their lower back. So you're supposed to have a small curve, a lordosis, but theirs is excessive. Is that a corroborating factor? Is that supposed to be ignored? Does that matter? Or should we even look at that? Or should we just say, oh, you have pain. It could be from 1,000 tissues. I'm just going to guess which one. Right. Or do we try to say, well, if it's one particular tissue, there might be other things that will guide us to that. Right. Okay, so that person has that excessive arch in their back. Now, another thing I say is, okay, so why don't you try bending forward? Put your hands on your thighs, bend down as far as you can until you can't go any farther. And you find that they are greatly limited in their flexibility. But more importantly, not only are they limited, you notice that they have this excessive hunching in the upper back, but you kind of notice that that lower back never came out of that arch. Mm-hmm. When in fact, normal back, lower back, lumbar motion is supposed to be, you start with an arch, and when you bend forward, you're supposed to reverse into a hunch. Yep. They didn't do that at all. So you have loss of range of motion with a specific indication that loss is in the lumbar region. Then they say, you know, it's the weirdest thing. I can sit as long as I want, but as soon as I go to stand up, I can't get up. The pain is so great. I have to kind of push on my thighs and get myself to stand. Right. And then once I stand, it seems to diffuse. Are these things that are to be ignored, or are these corroborating symptoms that the tissue in distress is trying to present to you because you're the grand interpreter? Because your responsibility isn't just to treat people. Your responsibility is first to identify a tissue in distress, because that's the only way you're going to resolve the symptom, is to know what tissue you're supposed to treat. And so all of those represent that they have shortened lower back muscles. Their QLs are basically straining. So then you have to go on to the next process of, well, what would cause low back muscles to be shortened in this position, in this situation? Well, the answer is, and people often talk about the core, and because they think that the essence of core muscle is that opposing muscle has to be balanced. The difference in the back to abdominal concept is that the abdominal sheath is very, very thin, very unable to create a lot of force, and basically its function is to support the abdominal viscera. That's what it's there. So when you look at short and low back muscles, the low back muscles begin at the bottom of the rib cage and end at the top of the pelvis. So the question is what's happening that the muscles are shortening because these 2 points are coming closer together? And the answer is yes, you would know that because part of that increased arching, you would also see that the pelvis is anteriorly tilted, meaning that the back of the pelvis has risen in terms of the front of the pelvis. Well, yep.
So they're doing one of these.
Right, exactly. So what's causing that to happen? It's not coming from above it, it's below it. It is an imbalance between the quadricep muscles and the hamstrings.
You're speaking my language right here.
There we go. You're going to get this. Let me tell you something. Yep. The people who have the best understanding of what I do is nobody in the medical system. If you have a medical degree, you don't know this. You don't want to know this because it's a fee-for-service basis. They get paid no matter what happens. Massage therapists and physical therapists and personal trainers, those are the two primary groups that have the greatest ability to understand what I'm talking about. Straight out, no question, because they have some ingrained understanding of muscle.
Yes.
Okay. So all I would do in a case like that is stretch the quad, strengthen the hamstrings and the gluteus maximus, and probably in a treatment or two treatments, they're pain-free and fully functional.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is sustain the balance, and they don't have symptoms anymore, and they're fully functional.
What I find is so funny with people who are in that postural dysfunction where they have the anterior tilt, they have the over-tightened quads, their hamstrings are not strong enough to keep the pelvis neutral.
Correct.
Those people need such a low level of hamstring activation because they tend to get cramps. Like if they even very remotely, just very lightly engage their hamstrings, they're like, oh God, And
so let me explain.
A lot of time, right?
Well, let's explain that concept. Well, we know that the quad is shortened. And if we look at muscle fibers, muscle basically consists of actin and myosin. One looks like a set of golf balls. The other looks like a set of golf clubs. And what happens is the golf clubs grab the golf balls, pull on the others, creating cross bridging, and that's how force is created. So we have what's known as the sliding fiber theory. So the optimal length of that muscle is when all of my fingers are touching fully. This is when the muscle creates its greatest force. Well, this is your quad.
Yep.
Right? So now the fibers have gone beyond each other. Very, very little force output. That's one of the problems. That's why the muscle constrained, even though it's, when it's shortened. Oh, but look at the hamstring. If the quad is shortened, the hamstring is over lengthened. So there's very little cross bridging. And in fact, it's at a point where the muscle fibers have separated severely. Any attempt to create force where there's very little cross bridging available, well, you're going to strain the muscle. So it's very funny you say this because it's so freaking common. I'll say, let me say you stand up and stretch your quad because you just want them to grab the ankle and pull it towards the butt, right? And that's how they would stretch it. You know what they do? They initiate. Oh my God, my hamstring just went into
right. Yeah.
Just trying to lift the foot. It goes into spasm.
No weight whatsoever.
Nothing. All they're trying to do is actively raise it. And so I say, okay, I'm going to show you something. You see, it just went into spasm. Now, you have to understand the scariness of this type of stuff. If that person goes to their GP and says, I get cramping, they're going to start treating them. They're going to start doing and saying, oh my God, are you diabetic? Oh, you've got a metabolic dysfunction. That's the danger of symptoms without going to someone who has the opportunity to understand it in its overall nature.
Yeah.
That's why it's so dangerous. So I'll say, before you do anything else, I'm going to show you a really simple thing. Try and do it, right? You brought it into spasm. Okay. Well, now I'm going to have you sit. And the way I do all my exercises is that there's a principle that I want people to understand about strengthening, which is to say that any muscle moves one joint in one direction. There's the stable side of the joint, and then there's the movement side of the joint. On the stable side, if I could make all the body be as stable as possible, that means no energy is being exposed or utilized for the stabilization portion, which allows all the energy to go towards the movement portion. So if I'm going to do a hamstring curl with a person, even with a resistance band, I have them seated. And then I use the appropriate resistance for the appropriate exertion level. I'll have them do 3 sets of 10 repetitions with that. And then I'll say, okay, try to get it up. Boom. Pick up the ankle, stretch the quad, no problem. So you're keying in exactly at what the problem is, which is that hamstring has become over lengthened due to the imbalance. And that's all happening because of the imbalance between the quad and the hamstring. With the appropriate strengthening, this can be brought back and resolved. And in terms of function, you bring back full function. They can sit as long as they want. They can get up as much as they want. They can walk, everything. And so that's kind of an example of where I do what I do.
Absolutely. You were talking about like stability, and you want to stabilize the joint, stabilize the body as much as possible before moving it. I use a concept, I call it points of contact. So somebody who's very unstable, very imbalanced, out of alignment, I'm not going to give them any standing exercises because they only have 2 points of contact, left foot, right foot, on the floor. Everything else is just free for all. They don't even know how to put in the right position. So a new person, I'll put them on their back, typically on the floor, because now we have their shoulders, their spine, their hips, their feet, everything is stable. Now we can start working some things because most people, when they first start out with my program, at least, they have a very poor kinesthetic awareness of where the body actually is, right? They don't know their hamstrings are weak. They don't know their quads are overly tight or their hip flexors are tight. So, so do you work predominantly through exercise, or are there other
100%?
100% just movement.
So the essence, let's take a bigger overall picture. So we'll acknowledge that chronic pain has never existed in the history of mankind. It's fact. You could look at the annals of medical history. It started in the.
Would you say when do you think that cutoff was? Like sometime in the early 20th century, or what do you think it was?
It's the late 1980s, early 1990s. That's when chronic pain began.
Wow,
there's no question. Yeah, it's irrefutable. So I'll give you the kind of historical premise behind this. So in the late 1980s, something changed dramatically in the way mankind functioned globally, all ages. That's called technology, automation, the phone, the computer. And what you saw was that people went from a substantial amount of occupation being physically involved and went to pure sitting, right? And so if you looked at prior to the late 1980s, the average population that had chronic pain was who? Old people.
Old people, yeah.
It was called rheumatism. They would say, my rheumatism's acting up, right? Rheumatism relating to rheumatoid. They thought it was arthritis. It wasn't. It was the fact that suddenly they stopped moving, and as a result, they weakened. When they did try to do activity, they didn't have the force output of the muscle relating to the force requirement of the activity, so they would strain and elicit pain.
Right.
Well, what did you see? Now, that was the way it was, and it was always that. Well, as the 1980s and early 1990s are starting to go forward, now you're seeing people in their 20s and 30s starting to suffer from pain all the way, the entire gamut of all ages. I treated a girl who was 20 years old who told me she thought she had a and individual that led to a vast degree of the population now not having the force output of their muscles to address the force requirements of their activity. So that's what led to the rise in the number of people from suffering from pain. But what about chronic pain? Why did it become chronic? Well, all of these people, what was one of the great innovations during this massive outgrowth of technology? Oh, that was the MRI. The MRI was invented in the middle to late 1980s. So here you have this shitload of people suddenly seeking care for pain, which has never happened before. And by the way, so people can really wrap their head around this understanding, what was the MRI invented for? Was it to identify the cause? No. It was invented to identify tumors in the brain. Look up the history of the MRI. You'll see that's what it was invented for. So you really want to, if there is ever an attempt to go back and try to restructure this and figure out who's to blame for hundreds of millions of people being in pain and people killing themselves and being depressed, where did this shift come from where the MRI was being used to identify tumors in the brain to identifying a tissue in distress creating pain? That's the big question. But anyway, it found these structural variations, and since muscle was the cause, and I would describe in more than 98% of the cases, well, it's finding the wrong tissue, and that's the tissue that keeps being treated. So the muscle continues to be in distress, continues to elicit pain, and continues to have the person be dysfunctional. So there's the lead up from why a larger population had pain to why it became chronic.
Got it.
That's it.
This is fascinating. You're definitely, like I said, speaking my language. We are coming a little short on time, so I want to give you a chance to promote whatever you're working on now, your website, social media, any books you've written. How can people find you online?
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest form, if someone wants to reach out to me, if they're concerned or have questions about their situation, just email me at drmitch@mitchellyass.com, or you could just go to my website, which is livewithoutpains.com. There's also a contact us button there. You can learn about the method. I think the other big thing I would suggest, go to YouTube and just search Dr. Mitchell Yass. I've got hundreds of videos. I have been doing this for so long. I put out so much content, all free, all available. My goal is much more about being an educator than a practitioner. I do treat and I will help people resolve their pain, but you will never have your pain resolved until you could finally come to the realization of questioning whether it's that you've got the right diagnosis or the wrong diagnosis. Without that, you really can't get better.
100%. So you're mostly about education. Do you have a practice? Are you?
Oh, yeah. I have a practice. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. Awesome. But a substantial amount that I do is online through Zoom sessions. I just treated a guy in Jordan, which was quite incredible. Really an exciting thing for me. Yeah. So if you don't have to come here to get the treatment. All the sessions are videotaped. There's a whole process of understanding. Once we know what's muscular, which muscles, how to strengthen them, how to set the resistance up, and they're videotaped. So you get to use that going forward. And this is really intended for the person to become empowered and to be able to take control of their lives again. God, people are desperate. They really need to know that that's available for them.
Yeah, and this really is, it's the musculoskeletal system. It really is kind of the gateway into how a lot of other organs function. I remember I heard of a case. This woman was severely constipated. She hadn't gone to the bathroom in like 2 or 3 weeks, and she had a posteriorly tipped pelvis. And so she was like sort of clamping everything off. She didn't know if it was related, but we helped her get an arch in the back, and then boom, she's in the bathroom. So a lot of other systems are related to the way that the muscles work and the way that the muscles are holding the joints and the bones in their sort of resting position, right? So
There's just no question. If you really want to understand the premise, you live in a gravitational environment, right? What's the only thing that allows you to function, to live in any respect? It's muscle. So always think about the fact heart, liver, kidney, spleen, everything is being done to supplement the health of your muscle. You don't function without a strong musculoskeletal system. That begins to go, every one of your systems will spiral down and you'll be done.
Boom. Yep.
Absolutely.
100%. Well, Dr. Mitchell Yass, thank you so much for joining me today on Health in the Real World. I appreciate it so much. Everyone watching this, check him out, his website that he gave, and videos, YouTube videos. Thank you, Mitchell. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Health in the Real World show. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below. Visit mycorebalance.com to learn more.